Elise Matthews stood before a cracked mirror in her tiny attic bedroom, staring at her reflection with tearful eyes. At 22, she should have been excited about her future. Instead, she was preparing for a marriage she never wanted to a man she had never met. "Elise, get down here this instant." The shrill voice of Madame Beaumont, her adopted mother, pierced through the floorboards. Elise took a deep breath, smoothing down the simple white dress that hung loosely on her slender frame. It wasn't the wedding dress she had dreamed of as a little girl. But then again, nothing about this day matched her childhood fantasies. 17 years ago, Elise had been found abandoned at St. Mary's Orphanage, with nothing but a silver locket bearing the initials EM. After 10 lonely years there, Madame Beaumont had appeared, offering what Elise thought was salvation. But the woman hadn't wanted a daughter. She wanted an unpaid servant to cook, clean, and tend to her boarding house. "I'm coming, Madame Beaumont," Elise called back, her voice barely above a whisper. As she descended the narrow staircase, memories flooded back. The countless nights she had cried herself to sleep, the dreams she had of escaping to university on the scholarship she had secretly earned, the stories she wrote by candlelight when everyone else was asleep. All those dreams had crumbled 2 weeks ago when Madame Beaumont announced that Elise would marry the son of an old acquaintance, a man named Thomas Reed, who lived on the outskirts of town. The local gossip said he was strange, reclusive, possibly even dangerous. They whispered that he lived like a hermit in a dilapidated cottage inherited from his late parents, that he spoke to no one, that there was something wrong with him. "Please, madam, I don't want to marry him," Elise had pleaded. Madame Beaumont's response had been ice cold. "You have nowhere else to go, girl. I've fed and clothed you for 7 years. Thomas Reed needs a wife, and I need to be rid of you. The arrangement benefits us all." Now, standing in the foyer of the boarding house where guests had gathered to witness the modest ceremony, Elise felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning, perhaps her final act of freedom. The front door opened, and there he stood, Thomas Reed, tall and gaunt, with unkempt dark hair and clothes that had seen better days. His eyes, though his eyes were a startling blue, and there was something in them that Elise couldn't quite place. Was it sadness, resignation, or something else entirely? Little did Elise know that this forced union was about to take a turn that would leave everyone, including her cruel adopted mother, completely speechless. The ceremony was brief and impersonal. The local magistrate, a friend of Madame Beaumont's, hurried through the vows as if he had somewhere better to be. Thomas spoke his parts in a low, hesitant voice, never once meeting Elise's eyes. When it came time for her to say, "I do," Elise felt the words catch in her throat. A long, awkward silence filled the room until Madame Beaumont's sharp elbow in her ribs prompted the barely audible response. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the magistrate declared, snapping his book shut. No kiss was exchanged. No cheers erupted. Only the satisfied smile on Madame Beaumont's face as she ushered the newlyweds out the door, Elise's small trunk of belongings already loaded onto Thomas's weathered cart. "Goodbye, Elise," Madame Beaumont said, her tone final. "You've been useful. I trust you'll be the same for your husband." Then to Thomas, "Remember our arrangement. She's your responsibility now." The ride to Thomas's cottage was silent, except for the creaking of the cart wheels and the occasional snort from the old horse pulling them. Elise stared at the passing landscape, watching as the neat houses of town gave way to rolling countryside, and finally to the edge of the woods where, nestled among ancient oaks, stood a small stone cottage with a thatched roof in need of repair. "It's not much," Thomas said, his first words to her since their vows, "but it's home." Elise nodded, unable to speak, as Thomas helped her down from the cart. Their hands touched briefly, and she was surprised to find his gentle despite their roughness. The inside of the cottage was unexpected. While the exterior appeared neglected, the interior was clean and organized, if sparse. A fire crackled in the hearth, warming the single room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A narrow staircase led to what Elise assumed was a bedroom in the loft above. "Are you hungry?" Thomas asked, moving to tend the fire. "No, thank you," Elise replied, though her stomach betrayed her with a quiet rumble. She hadn't been able to eat anything at breakfast. Thomas glanced at her, a hint of something like understanding crossing his features. Without another word, he began preparing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and apples. As he worked, Elise noticed his movements were precise, almost elegant despite his rugged appearance. They ate in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. When they finished, Thomas cleared his throat. "I'll sleep down here by the fire," he said, gesturing to a worn but clean pallet in the corner. "You can have the loft. There's a proper bed up there." Elise looked at him in surprise. This wasn't what she had expected. "But we're married." Thomas's face reddened slightly. "Not by choice. Not for either of us, I suspect." He paused, his eyes finally meeting hers. "I won't force anything on you, Elise. I may be poor and outcast, but I'm not a monster." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by curiosity. "Why did you agree to this marriage then?" Thomas turned away, busying himself with the dishes. "Madame Beaumont holds something over me, a debt my father couldn't pay before he died. She threatened to take this cottage. It's all I have left of my family." His voice grew quiet. "When she suggested I marry her adopted daughter in exchange for canceling the debt, I agreed. I didn't know you were being forced to." As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness slowly began to dissolve. Thomas showed Elise around the small cottage and its surroundings. There was a vegetable garden out back, chickens in a small coop, and a workshop attached to the side of the house where Thomas apparently spent most of his time. "What do you do?" Elise asked, peering into the workshop filled with tools, with shavings, and what appeared to be half-finished furniture pieces. "I'm a woodworker," Thomas replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice for the first time. "My father taught me. People from town used to commission pieces from him, but after he fell ill and I took over, he trailed off, his expression darkening. Well, that's when the rumors started, that I was strange, dangerous even." "Are you?" Elise asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Thomas looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "Dangerous? No. Strange? Perhaps. I prefer my own company and that of the trees. I've never been good with people. They don't understand me, and I've stopped trying to understand them." That night, as Elise lay in surprisingly comfortable bed in the loft, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as Thomas moved about below, she wondered what twist of fate had brought her here. She had escaped one prison only to find herself in another, albeit a less hostile one. The next morning, Elise woke to the smell of porridge cooking. She descended the stairs to find Thomas already up and working. "Good morning," he said, without looking up from the pot he was stirring. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Elise replied, surprised to realize it was true. The bed had been the most comfortable she'd slept in since coming to Madame Beaumont's. As they ate breakfast, Elise decided to break the silence. "I can help around here," she offered. "I'm good at cooking and cleaning. I helped run Madame Beaumont's boarding house." Thomas nodded. "That would be nice. But you don't have to be a servant here, Elise. This is your home now, too." The word struck her deeply. Home. She hadn't had a real home since her parents died, parents she couldn't even remember. Over the next few weeks, they fell into an uneasy rhythm. Elise tended to the cottage and garden, while Thomas worked in his workshop, crafting beautiful furniture that no one came by. They took their meals together, gradually sharing more conversation each day. Elise learned that Thomas was well-read despite his isolated life, with a small but treasured collection of books. She in turn shared her own love of literature and writing. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Thomas unexpectedly asked, "Why did Madame Beaumont adopt you if she treated you so poorly?" Elise stared into flames. "Free labor," she said simply, "and appearances. In town, she portrayed herself as a charitable soul who took in an orphan. Behind closed doors, I was nothing but a burden she reminded me she could cast out at any moment." Thomas was quiet for a long time before saying, "We have that in common, then, being used by her." Their eyes met across the firelight, and for the first time, Elise felt a connection forming between them, the shared understanding of two wounded souls. But as April turned to May and the woods around the cottage burst into spring bloom, something strange began happening in the village. Rumors started circulating about Thomas and Elise. Some said he had enchanted her. Others whispered that he kept her prisoner. A few even claimed to have seen bruises on her when she occasionally went to the village market. The truth was far different. While their marriage remained unconsummated, a fragile friendship had begun to form. Thomas had revealed himself to be kind and considerate, if socially awkward. His woodworking, Elise discovered, was nothing short of extraordinary delicate carvings and joinery that spoke of master craftsmanship. "Why doesn't anyone buy your work?" she asked one day, running her fingers over an intricately carved jewelry box he had just completed. Thomas's face clouded. There was an incident years ago, a fire at the mayor's house. My father and I had installed new cabinets there the week before. They blamed our work for the fire, though the investigation proved it was faulty wiring. By then, the damage was done. People stopped commissioning pieces. My father's heart broke, and his health failed soon after. Elise's own heart ached for him. "That's not fair." "Life rarely is," Thomas replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. It was that evening that Elise made a decision. Without telling Thomas, she took 3 of his smaller pieces, a jewelry box, a carved bird, and a set of bookends, and wrapped them carefully. The next day, while Thomas was foraging in the woods, she traveled to a neighboring town where no one knew them and approached the finest shop on the main street. The owner of Hartwick's Fine Goods, Mr. Hartwick himself, examined Thomas's work with a jeweler's loupe and increasingly widened eyes. "This craftsmanship is extraordinary," he murmured, turning the carved bird over in his hands. "Who made these?" "My husband," Elise said, the word still feeling foreign on her tongue. "He's a master woodworker, but our village, they don't appreciate his work." Mr. Hartwick looked up at her, business calculation clear in his gaze. "I would take all 3 pieces on consignment. If they sell, and I have no doubt they will, I would be interested in a regular arrangement." Elise could hardly contain her excitement as she returned to the cottage. When Thomas came back from the woods, arms full of mushrooms and wild herbs, she blurted out what she had done. His reaction was not what she expected. His face paled, then flushed with anger. "You had no right," he said, his voice tight. "Those pieces weren't meant to be sold." "But, Thomas, Mr. Hartwick said they were extraordinary. He wants more." "I don't care what he said," Thomas shouted, making Elise flinch. Immediately, regret washed over his face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have raised my voice. But, Elise, you don't understand. Those pieces are personal. They're all I have left." "What do you mean?" Elise asked softly. Thomas sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "Each piece I make contains a part of my soul. My father taught me that woodworking isn't just craft, it's art, it's expression. When the village rejected my work, rejected me, I stopped sharing it. I couldn't bear more rejection." Elise knelt before him, taking his calloused hands in hers. "Thomas, your work deserves to be seen. You deserve to be recognized for your talent." He looked at her with those piercing blue eyes. "Why do you care? You're only here because we were both forced into this." The question hung in the air between them. Why did she care? When had this arrangement shifted into something else? "Because," Elise said slowly, "I've come to know you, the real you, not the person the village thinks you are, and that person deserves happiness." Something changed in Thomas's expression, then a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The moment was interrupted by a loud knocking at the door. They jumped apart as it burned. Thomas opened the door to find a messenger from the neighboring town. "Are you Thomas Reed?" the young boy asked. "I am. Mr. Hartwick sends his compliments." All 3 pieces sold within hours of being displayed. "He's asking if you would bring more work next market day. He included payment for your pieces." The boy handed over a small but heavy pouch that clinked with coins. After the messenger left, Thomas stood frozen, the pouch of money in his hand. Elise watched emotions play across his face: disbelief, hope, fear, and something that looked almost like joy. "They sold," he whispered. "They sold," Elise confirmed, smiling. "That night everything changed. As they sat by the fire, counting the coins more money than either had seen in months, Thomas suddenly looked up at Elise. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing in me when no one else did." "I believe in what's good and true," Elise replied, "and your work is both." In that moment, something ignited between them. Thomas reached for her hand, and this time neither pulled away. As the firelight cast dancing shadows across the cottage walls, they began to truly see each other not as the forced partners they had been, but as the companions they were becoming. The next day, Thomas threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, creating pieces even more beautiful than before. Elise wrote descriptions for each piece, noting the type of wood, the techniques used, the story behind each design. Together, they prepared for the next market day. News of Thomas's success in the neighboring town eventually reached their own village. People who had shunned him for years suddenly found reasons to pass by the cottage, peering in with curious eyes. Madame Beaumont, hearing rumors of their change in fortune, appeared at their door one afternoon, all smiles and false affection. "My dear children," she cooed, attempting to step inside, "I've come to see how married life suits you." Thomas blocked the doorway, his stance protective. "We're doing well, Madame Beaumont. Better than expected." "I always knew you two would be perfect together," she said, her eyes darting past him to glimpse the interior of the cottage now brightened with new curtains Elise had sewn and a table laden with Thomas's works in progress. "Perhaps I could come in for tea? We have so much to catch up on." Before Thomas could respond, Elise appeared beside him. "I'm afraid we're quite busy today, madam. Perhaps another time." Her voice was polite but firm. Madame Beaumont's smile faltered. "Now, Elise, is that any way to treat the woman who raised you? Who arranged this advantageous marriage?" "Advantageous for whom?" Thomas asked quietly. "The debt you held over me was manufactured, wasn't it? My father paid you in full before he died. I found the receipts among his papers last week." The color drained from Madame Beaumont's face. That's preposterous. You can't prove anything." "Actually," Elise interjected, "the magistrate was quite interested in those receipts, and in the other evidence of your business practices that I provided him with." Madame Beaumont stumbled backward as if struck. "You ungrateful little—" "Goodbye, madam," Thomas said firmly, closing the door on her sputtering protests. As her footsteps receded down the path, Elise felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She turned to Thomas, who was watching her with undisguised admiration. "You've changed," he said, wonderment in his voice. Elise considered this. "Not changed, just found myself. The person I was always meant to be." Thomas nodded, understanding his eyes. "I know exactly what you mean." The day of the neighboring town's summer festival arrived 2 months after their wedding. Thomas and Elise had prepared a display of his finest work tables, chairs, decorative boxes, children's toys, and wall hangings, all showcasing his exceptional talent. They set up their stall early, nervous energy making them both quieter than usual. "What if no one comes?" Thomas whispered, the old fears resurfacing. Elise squeezed his hand. "They will. Trust me." As the festival opened and people began flooding the town square, curious glances soon turned to admiring gasps. By midday, a crowd had gathered around their stall, and by evening, they had sold nearly everything they brought and taken orders for more. Among the customers was a well-dressed gentleman who spent a long time examining each piece. "Remarkable work," he said finally, introducing himself as Lord Westfield from the city. "I'm renovating my library and would be interested in commissioning a complete set of shelves, a desk, and reading chairs. Would that be something you could manage, Mr. Reed?" Thomas, stunned, looked to Elise, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, my lord. I would be honored." "Excellent. My steward will be in touch with the details and a substantial advance." Lord Westfield smiled. "Talent like yours deserves recognition, Mr. Reed. I'll make sure my friends hear of your work." After he left, Thomas pulled Elise behind their stall and, for the first time, wrapped her in a tight embrace. "This is happening because of you," he whispered into her hair. "You gave me courage when I had none." Elise pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "No, Thomas. The talent was always yours. I just helped you remember how to share it. In that moment, surrounded by the buzz of the festival and the remnants of their success, Thomas lowered his head and gently pressed his lips to hers. Their first kiss not forced by ceremony or convention, but freely given and received. "I think," he said softly as they parted, "I'm falling in love with my wife. Elise's heart soared, and I with my husband." That night, as they returned to their cottage, no longer just a shelter, but truly a home, they spoke of dreams that now seemed possible. Expanding the workshop, perhaps even opening a small shop of their own one day. As they talked, Elise absently played with the silver locket she always wore, the one bearing her initials that had been with her since the orphanage. "You never take that off," Thomas observed. "It's my only link to whoever I was before the orphanage," Elise explained. "I've always hoped it might hold some clue to my past, but it's never opened. The clasp seems fused shut." Thomas held out his hand. "May I?" Hesitantly, Elise removed the locket and placed it in his palm. Thomas examined it carefully, his craftsman's eyes noticing details others might miss. "This isn't fused," he said after a moment. "It's a hidden mechanism." With deft fingers, he pressed on a nearly invisible seam, and to Elise's astonishment, the locket sprang open. Inside was a tiny portrait of a young couple, and, folded impossibly small, a note. With trembling fingers, Elise unfolded it and read aloud. "Asterisk to our beloved Elise Margaret Thornfield. If you are reading this, know that leaving you is our greatest sorrow. Circumstances beyond our control forced this separation. Find us at Thornfield Hall, in Northshire, if fate allows. You are loved beyond measure. Mother and father." Asterisk. Elise's voice broke on the last words. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders as she stared at the portrait of the man with her own gray eyes, the woman with her auburn hair. "Thornfield," Thomas murmured. "I know of it. It's a grand estate about 2 days' journey from here." Elise looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "They might still be there. After all these years, they might be looking for me." "Then we'll find them," Thomas said simply. "Tomorrow we'll begin the journey." 2 days later, they stood before the imposing gates of Thornfield Hall. Elise clutched Thomas's hand as they approached the main house, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. A distinguished butler answered their knock, eyeing them with well-bred suspicion. "May I help you?" "My name is Elise," she began, her voice shaking. "Elise Thornfield. I believe my parents might live here." The butler's impassive expression faltered, his eyes widening as he took in her features. Without a word, he ushered them into a grand sitting room and disappeared. Minutes later, the door burst open. A tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and familiar gray eyes stood frozen in the doorway, an elegant woman with auburn hair close behind him. "Elise?" The man whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Is it really you?" Wordlessly, Elise held out the locket. The woman gave a small cry, rushing forward to embrace her. "My baby," she sobbed. "My darling girl. We never stopped looking for you." The story tumbled out between tears and embraces. Lord and Lady Thornfield had been traveling abroad when their carriage was attacked by highwaymen. In the chaos, their infant daughter was taken not for ransom as they initially believed, but stolen by a rival who sought to hurt them in the most cruel way possible. By the time they discovered the truth, the trail had gone cold. For 22 years, they had searched, never losing hope. "And now you've come home," Lord Thornfield said, his voice thick with emotion. "And with a husband, I see." He extended his hand to Thomas, who stood awkwardly to the side. "Yes, father," Elise said, the word strange yet wonderful on her tongue. "This is Thomas. He helped me find you. He helped me find myself." That evening, as they dined in the grand hall of what was now revealed to be Elise's ancestral home, Thomas leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Are you happy, Lady Thornfield?" Elise smiled, taking his hand under the table. "I'm still just Elise." "You're Elise. And yes, I'm happier than I ever dreamed possible." "What happens now?" Thomas asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "You're the daughter of a lord. I'm still just a woodworker." The finest woodworker in the country, Lord Thornfield interjected, having overheard. And I've seen enough of your work today to know that's no exaggeration. I have connections throughout England who would value such craftsmanship. And more importantly, Lady Thornfield added gently, you love our daughter. We can see it in the way you look at her. That makes you family, regardless of your background. Later that night, in a luxurious guest chamber they had been given, Elise and Thomas stood by the window, looking out over the moonlit gardens of Thornfield Hall. When Madame Beaumont forced us to marry, Elise said softly, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. Thomas turned to her, framing her face with his hands. From orphan to lady of the manor, it's like something from one of your stories. The best stories are the ones we never see coming, Elise replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. 6 months later, Thomas and Elise stood hand in hand before Thornfield Hall, now transformed by autumn colors. Behind them, a newly built workshop stood proudly adjacent to main house Thomas's domain, where he created pieces now sought after by the highest levels of society. Elise, dressed in a simple but elegant gown that reflected her new station without sacrificing her inherent modesty, smiled as she watched a familiar figure approach along the drive. Madame Beaumont, significantly less grand than when they had last seen her, dismounted from the public coach. Her boarding house had failed after the magistrate's investigation revealed years of fraud and mistreatment. Now she had come, as instructed, to answer for her role in Elise's abduction all those years ago. You're really going through with this? Thomas asked quietly. Elise nodded. Not for vengeance, but for closure, and to ensure she never harms another child. As Madame Beaumont approached, her eyes widened at the sight of Elise standing confidently beside her husband, with Lord and Lady Thornfield emerging from the house to stand behind them. The realization of who Elise truly was, and what she had done in stealing and selling a child, dawned on her face with horrifying clarity. Welcome to Thornfield Hall, Madame Beaumont, Elise said calmly. We have much to discuss. Later, after justice had been arranged not in the form of prison, which Elise deemed too cruel even for Madame Beaumont, but in the form of restitution and lifelong service at an actual orphanage under close supervision, Elise and Thomas retired to their private chambers. You showed mercy, Thomas said, pulling her close. After everything she did, bitterness would only have poisoned our happiness, Elise replied, and we have so much to be happy about. She guided his hand to her abdomen, where the slightest rounding had begun to show. Thomas's eyes widened, then filled with tears of joy. A child, he whispered. Our child. Elise nodded, her own eyes shining. Our child will know only love and security. The cycle of abandonment ends with us. And so it did. The poor orphan and the outcast had found not just each other, but family, a legacy, and a love that defied all expectations. Their story spread throughout the county and beyond, not as gossip or scandal, but as a testament to the power of kindness, perseverance, and seeing the true worth in others when the world has turned its back. From forced vows to genuine love, from isolation to community, from loss to reclamation, theirs was a journey that left everyone who heard it speechless with wonder. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and Thomas's workshop flourished, they never forgot the difficult path that had brought them together, grateful for every twist of fate that had led them home.